Trump calls Kimmel a failed comedian on his own show until Kimmel reveals hospital records, a whistleblower nurse, and mismatched signatures. The challenge, a public DNA test with Ivanka and Barron. Will he take it? It was a night like any other on Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show, or so the audience thought. The studio lights glowed warmly, laughter and chatter filled the room, and viewers settled in, expecting the usual blend of jokes, celebrity interviews, and playful commentary. Jimmy Kimmel himself was relaxed, smiling, ready to riff on the day's news and entertain his audience with his signature humor. But what happened next would transform what was supposed to be a light-hearted night into a moment that no one would forget. The door opened, and in walked Donald Trump. As of 2025, he was still serving as president, and his presence in any room immediately carried weight. He was a figure known for speaking bluntly, for commanding attention, and for responding quickly whenever he felt slighted. That night, he didn't walk in with a handshake or a smile meant to put the audience at ease. Instead, he immediately fixed his gaze on Kimmel and without hesitation spoke words that cut sharply through the room. "You're a failed comedian," Trump said, his tone firm, his words heavy with judgment. "Your career is built on cheap shots because real people never laughed at you." The room fell silent for a moment. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kimmel himself paused, and for the first time that evening, the usual rhythm of jokes and laughter halted. It wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge, a direct attack designed to put him on the defensive. The kind of moment that could make many people stumble, unsure of how to respond without escalating the tension further. But Kimmel was not most people. He had spent years performing under pressure, hosting live shows, and facing criticism from every direction. He understood the power of timing, of staying calm, and of knowing exactly when to respond. And instead of snapping back or trying to deflect with humor, he paused deliberately and spoke with a seriousness that immediately drew attention. "Tonight isn't about jokes," he said, his voice steady, his expression serious. "It's about truth." The audience leaned forward. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and compelling. It was unusual to hear a late-night host shift the tone from entertainment to something more serious so quickly. Kimmel's words carried weight, signaling that what was coming next was important. People didn't just want to laugh, they wanted to see what would happen. Kimmel had a way of making complicated or tense moments feel understandable, and he seized that skill immediately. He didn't try to match Trump's intensity with anger. He didn't launch into a barrage of insults or jokes in retaliation. Instead, he chose to create a different kind of tension, one built on curiosity, surprise, and the promise of revelation. By framing the moment as a search for truth rather than a personal feud, he shifted the power of the exchange. The audience and anyone watching at home began to realize that this was not a typical confrontation. This was something bigger, something that could not be ignored. Trump, on the other hand, seemed to expect the usual reaction, denial, embarrassment, or perhaps a quick attempt of humor to diffuse the situation. When none of that happened, the president's expression tightened and his voice carried a sharper edge. He had come prepared to defend his position and to attack Kimmel's credibility. He was confident, aggressive, and unrelenting. And for the first time in the evening, it felt like the tables were turning, though not necessarily in Trump's favor. Kimmel, sensing the shift, maintained his composure. He understood that in moments like this, losing control could mean losing the narrative, and he knew that the audience was watching closely, hungry for something beyond the usual punchlines. Every word, every pause, every glance mattered. He spoke slowly, clearly, making sure the audience could follow his logic. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was the kind of tension that grips viewers, the kind that keeps them fully engaged. As the minutes passed, it became clear that Kimmel was not going to respond the way most people might expect. He wasn't going to be intimidated by the attack. He wasn't going to stumble or retreat. Instead, he leaned into the moment, signaling to the audience that what was about to come would matter. The sense of anticipation grew, almost like a story unfolding in real time. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for what he would do next. It was in that pause, that careful holding of attention, that Kimmel began to reclaim the narrative. He subtly shifted the conversation from insult to inquiry, from attack to discovery. His approach was not about winning an argument in the moment. It was about setting the stage for something larger, something that would challenge assumptions and force a conversation that extended beyond the studio. In a few carefully chosen words, he had transformed what could have been an awkward clash into a situation filled with curiosity and suspense. By the time he finished speaking, the audience was no longer thinking about jokes or failures. They were thinking about truth, about evidence, about what might come next. The night had changed completely. What started as a routine late-night show had become the start of an unfolding story that no one could ignore. In that moment, it was clear that Kimmel's strength lay not in laughter or insults, but in patience, clarity, and courage. He had faced an immediate personal attack from one of the most powerful people in the country, and instead of reacting impulsively, he chose to respond thoughtfully. The audience felt it. The tension in the room had shifted from confrontation to anticipation. Something significant was about to happen, and everyone was ready to witness it. After the tense opening, the room was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound echo. Jimmy Kimmel had just faced a sharp attack from President Trump, and the audience was still processing what had just happened. Then Kimmel made a move that no one could have predicted. He reached for a document, holding it up carefully so everyone could see. The audience leaned in immediately. On the surface, it looked like a birth certificate, but Kimmel didn't speak right away. He let the document take a moment to sink in. When he finally spoke, he did so with a calm, serious tone that contrasted sharply with the tension that had filled the room minutes earlier. "Tonight isn't about jokes," he said again, reinforcing the gravity of the situation. "It's about truth." As the screen behind him zoomed in on the document, everyone could see the names listed clearly. Mother, Ivanka Marie Trump. Father, Donald John Trump. A ripple went through the room. Gasps and murmurs of disbelief spread across the audience. People exchanged looks, some eyebrows raised, some jaws dropped. The claim was bold, and the moment was charged with curiosity and doubt. Kimmel explained the origins of the document. It had been mailed to him anonymously by someone claiming to be a former hospital worker in New York. The story behind it added layers of mystery. Who had sent it? Why now? And most importantly, what did it mean? Kimmel didn't rush. He shared the information slowly, making sure the audience could follow every detail. The suspense built naturally, and everyone watching felt the weight of the revelation. "This changes everything," Kimmel said, emphasizing the seriousness of the document. Those words hung in the air, heavy and compelling. The audience was captivated. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a challenge to the public narrative, a document that raised questions about truth, history, and accountability. The moment felt larger than any joke or late-night skit. For the first time that evening, the focus shifted entirely from humor to investigation. Trump, of course, responded immediately. His voice carried over the quiet of the studio, firm and forceful. He called the certificate fake and dismissed it as made-up nonsense meant to hurt my family. There was a sharpness in his words, a mix of anger and disbelief. For a moment, it seemed like the room might explode with tension again, but Kimmel remained unshaken. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. Instead, he continued with the story, letting the facts, or what he had, speak for themselves. The audience began to notice a subtle shift. Kimmel's calm and deliberate approach contrasted with Trump's forceful denials. Instead of escalating the argument, Kimmel was inviting viewers to think, to question, and to follow the evidence. The air in the room felt charged, but it was the kind of energy that makes people pay attention, that holds them on the edge of their seats. Kimmel then shared more about the source of the document. He explained that the former hospital worker had remained anonymous for safety reasons, but claimed direct knowledge of the events in question. The story involved not just the certificate itself, but details about what happened at the hospital during Baron Trump's birth. The level of specificity added credibility, or at least intrigue, to the document. It became more than a piece of paper. It became a thread that could unravel much larger questions. As Kimmel spoke, the audience began to understand the stakes. This was no longer just about a late-night feud or an insult thrown back and forth. It was about accountability, about public records, and about uncovering what might really be true. Every word Kimmel said was carefully chosen to build that understanding, to bring everyone along on a path that combined curiosity, suspense, and reason. Trump tried again, doubling down on his claim that the certificate was fake, but Kimmel was ready for him. He didn't argue emotionally, he focused on details and evidence. The contrast was striking. While Trump spoke with force, Kimmel spoke with precision. It wasn't about winning a shouting match. It was about presenting a story that demanded attention and careful thought. The tension grew as the audience began to whisper to themselves, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The document itself, the anonymous source, the conflicting statements, it all added layers of complexity. Kimmel allowed the story to unfold slowly, making sure each point landed clearly. He didn't rush. He understood that the suspense, the questions, and the unfolding drama were what would engage people most deeply. By the time Kimmel finished presenting the document, it was clear that the night had changed completely. What had started as a routine talk show was no longer about humor or entertainment. It had become a moment of confrontation and inquiry. The audience was captivated not by a joke or a punchline, but by a document, a claim, and the tension of truth being questioned in real time. Kimmel had taken a bold step, transforming a personal attack into a larger story. He had shifted the focus from insult to investigation, from criticism to curiosity. The stage was now set for what would come next, a chain of events that would challenge assumptions, question official narratives, and keep the audience thinking long after the cameras stopped rolling. By the end of the segment, the room was quiet, but tense in a different way, filled not with shock or anger, but with anticipation. Kimmel had made it clear that this was not about personal attacks. This was about evidence, truth, and questions that demanded answers. Everyone watching felt it. The story was just beginning, and the next moments promised to be even more revealing. The tension in the studio had barely begun to settle when Jimmy Kimmel introduced the next twist, a moment that would push the evening into entirely uncharted territory. The document he had presented was already shocking, but Kimmel hinted that there was more to the story, something even more unexpected, something that could challenge what people thought they knew. The audience felt the shift immediately, the sense that this night was no longer just about jokes or criticism. It was about uncovering something hidden. Kimmel explained that a guest would appear, someone with direct knowledge of events surrounding Baron Trump's birth. Her face was intentionally blurred and her voice was altered for protection, but the claim she brought was startling. She said she had worked at the hospital where Baron was born and that she had seen details of the birth that no one outside the hospital was supposed to know. From the moment she spoke, the story took a dramatic turn. According to her, Ivanka Trump had given birth in a private area of the hospital while Melania Trump was kept away. The suggestion itself was enough to make the audience lean in. Then she added a layer of intrigue. Lawyers had allegedly altered the hospital records afterward, changing the official story of the birth. The words were heavy, carefully chosen, and the implications were enormous. If true, it suggested not just a personal secret, but a coordinated effort to conceal the facts. Kimmel listened closely. His reaction was a mix of shock, caution, and calculation. He reminded viewers that this was serious and that the claims could not be taken lightly. If this is true, he said, it's not just gossip, it's a cover-up. The calm, measured tone in his voice made the words land even harder. This was not entertainment anymore. This was questioning history, records, and accountability at the highest level. Trump responded almost immediately, presenting what he called Baron's real birth certificate signed by Melania Trump. It was his strongest offense, a document intended to settle the debate and end any speculation. But the moment Kimmel compared the signatures on the documents, the tension intensified. They didn't match. The discrepancy was subtle but clear, and it left the audience questioning everything they had been told. Suddenly, the room was filled with doubt, not just about the documents, but about who was being truthful. The guest's testimony added more weight. She claimed to have observed events firsthand, and she spoke with a calm, factual tone. She didn't exaggerate, she didn't speculate, she simply relayed what she said she had seen and experienced. The audience could feel the credibility in her voice, even with her identity protected. The combination of an insider account and conflicting official documents created a sense of suspense and intrigue that no one had expected from a late-night show. Kimmel continued to press carefully, asking questions that encouraged clarity without confrontation. He emphasized that the focus was not on attacking anyone personally, but on understanding the facts. Each detail he revealed seemed to draw the audience deeper into the story. The mixture of personal testimony, official documents, and unanswered questions created a story that was unfolding in real time. Viewers felt like witnesses themselves, watching a puzzle piece by piece as the picture slowly emerged. Trump, visibly frustrated, doubled down on his claims. He insisted that Kimmel had invented the entire story to get even for past jokes, and he added that the supposed hospital worker had been fired years earlier for stealing. It was a forceful argument aimed at discrediting the witness and regaining control of the narrative. But Kimmel was ready. He responded with evidence, showing hospital records that contradicted Trump's claim and proved that the woman had been employed at the hospital when Barron was born. The audience was riveted. The narrative was no longer straightforward. What had started as an insult and a challenge had transformed into a complex web of claims, counterclaims, and evidence. Each revelation raised new questions, and every answer seemed to open another mystery. The tension was not about anger anymore. It was about curiosity, uncertainty, and the desire to know what was real. What made this segment remarkable was the way Kimmel managed the story. He maintained calm authority while presenting explosive claims. He allowed the audience to see the evidence, hear the testimony, and form their own opinions. He never sensationalized the story, and he never made assumptions. Instead, he guided viewers through a difficult and confusing scenario, helping them follow the thread of the unfolding events. By the time the guest finished speaking, it was clear that the night had transformed completely. The story had grown far beyond a late-night confrontation. It was now a public debate about credibility, truth, and the conflicting versions of history presented by powerful figures. The audience was no longer merely watching a show. They were watching a narrative unfold with real stakes and real questions that demanded answers. Kimmel closed that part of the segment by reminding viewers that the situation was serious and that conclusions could not be rushed. The combination of a mysterious witness, a conflicting birth certificate, and a powerful figure in denial created a story that was both gripping and unsettling. For the audience, it was a lesson in observation, reasoning, and the careful weighing of evidence. By the end of the segment, the room was quiet, but the quiet was filled with anticipation. Everyone understood that this was just the beginning. The story had grown in complexity, and the next moments promised even more revelations. Kimmel had successfully taken a moment that could have been purely confrontational and transformed it into a narrative full of suspense, evidence, and human intrigue. The audience, captivated and on edge, could only wait to see what would happen next. The tension from the previous revelations did not dissipate. In fact, it seemed to grow. Jimmy Kimmel had introduced a mysterious witness who claimed first-hand knowledge of Barron Trump's birth, and the conflicting birth certificates had left everyone questioning what was true. The studio and anyone watching was caught in a web of claims and counterclaims. Every detail mattered, and the narrative was thick with suspense. Donald Trump, frustrated and defensive, responded immediately. He argued that Kimmel had fabricated the entire story, saying the segment was a way to get even for past jokes made at his expense. He called the hospital worker, whose testimony had been critical to Kimmel's narrative, untrustworthy, insisting she had been fired years earlier for stealing. It was a direct attempt to discredit the witness and reclaim control of the narrative. The audience could sense the force in Trump's words, his determination to shut down the discussion before it spiraled further. Kimmel, however, did not falter. Instead of reacting emotionally or dismissing Trump's claims, he turned the focus to evidence. He displayed hospital documents on the big screen, showing that the woman had, in fact, been employed at the hospital during the time Barron was born. This revelation contradicted Trump's assertion and added weight to the witness's story. The contrast between denial and evidence created a palpable tension that kept the audience glued to every word. As the documents were shown, it became clear that the situation was more than just a personal attack or a celebrity spat. It had evolved into a real investigation, a moment where facts, testimonies, and official records were being weighed against one another. Kimmel walked the audience through the documents carefully, explaining what they showed without exaggeration. He emphasized that the goal was not to humiliate anyone, but to explore the truth. This careful presentation drew the viewers in, letting them see the complexity of the situation while maintaining clarity. Trump's next response was sharp and quick. He presented what he called Barron's real birth certificate signed by Melania Trump as evidence to refute Kimmel's claims. The gesture was intended to be decisive, an attempt to end the discussion by providing official-looking proof. But when Kimmel compared the signatures on the documents, it became apparent that they did not match. The discovery was subtle but undeniable. The audience, sensing the contradiction, began to question who was telling the truth. Doubt filled the room, and the narrative had become more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The back and forth between Trump and Kimmel continued, but the focus shifted. No longer was it a simple confrontation of personalities. It had become a struggle between narrative and evidence. Every claim required verification. Every statement was weighed carefully. Kimmel maintained a calm authority throughout, presenting each piece of evidence in a measured way. He understood that the audience needed clarity to follow the story, and that haste could undermine the credibility of the entire segment. The audience could feel the stakes rise. What began as a late-night insult had become a deeper confrontation about truth and accountability. Kimmel's approach, calm, deliberate, and focused on facts, was a stark contrast to Trump's energetic denials and emotional insistence. The contrast itself added tension. It became not just a story about the conflicting claims, but also about how individuals respond under pressure and how evidence can challenge even the most forceful denials. Kimmel then returned to the witness, carefully integrating her testimony with the evidence on the screen. He emphasized that the story was not just about personal attacks, but about facts, records, and accountability. Each piece of evidence, each document was presented in a way that allowed viewers to form their own judgments. The audience was no longer passively watching. They were actively evaluating, questioning, and piecing together the story. By this point, it was clear that Trump's denials were meeting a significant challenge. Kimmel's presentation of documents and the witness's account had shifted the dynamic. The conversation was no longer a battle of personalities, but a debate over facts and credibility. Every new piece of information added depth to the story, increasing suspense and engagement. The audience could feel the tension in the room, but it was a tension fueled by curiosity and the desire for truth rather than anger. Kimmel's handling of the situation revealed a key strength: his ability to navigate complexity without creating confusion. He did not exaggerate the claims, and he did not rely on hyperbole. Instead, he laid out the evidence, framed the questions clearly, and allowed viewers to engage with the story critically. The combination of an anonymous witness, conflicting documents, and official statements created a narrative that was both compelling and thought-provoking. As the segment moved toward its conclusion, Kimmel emphasized the seriousness of the claims. He reminded the audience that the situation involved more than speculation. It involved questions about public records, credibility, and transparency. The evidence he presented, paired with a witness's account, left viewers with more questions than answers, creating a sense of anticipation that lingered in the air. By the end of this portion of the broadcast, it was clear that the story had reached a turning point. Kimmel had successfully transformed what could have been a late-night spectacle into a thoughtful, evidence-driven narrative. He had shown that calm reasoning, careful presentation, and reliance on facts could hold their own, even in the face of forceful denials from a powerful figure. The audience left the segment not with conclusions, but with questions and the awareness that the next moments promised even more revelations. As the night progressed, the tension in the studio had grown to a level no one could have predicted. What began as a routine late-night show had transformed into a dramatic confrontation filled with questions, conflicting documents, and explosive claims. Jimmy Kimmel had presented a shocking document, introduced a mysterious witness, and carefully walked the audience through evidence that challenged President Trump's statements. And now, the moment had arrived where the stakes felt higher than ever. Kimmel paused for a moment, letting the weight of the evening settle over the audience. He spoke clearly and deliberately, reminding viewers that the purpose of the segment had never been about personal attacks. "This isn't about jokes," he said again. "This is about truth." Those words echoed in the room, serving as a bridge between the evidence presented and what needed to happen next. The focus was no longer on humor nor on insults, but on accountability and the pursuit of clarity. He then made a bold decision, a move that transformed the entire conversation into a direct challenge. Looking straight into the camera, he addressed the situation with precision and conviction. "If this is fake," he said, his voice steady, "take a DNA test publicly. Do it with Barron and Ivanka. Prove us wrong." The statement was simple, yet it carried enormous weight. It was not an attack, but a call for verification, a demand for transparency. It shifted the conversation from speculation to action, creating a moment of suspense that no one could ignore. The audience felt the gravity immediately. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Here was a challenge that cut through rhetoric and speculation, forcing the issue into a space where it could be proven or disproven. The tension was palpable. Trump's refusal or acceptance of this challenge would carry consequences far beyond the studio. The simplicity of Kimmel's statement, the call for a DNA test, made it undeniable, leaving no room for deflection or vague answers. Trump predictably refused. He called the suggestion disrespectful to my family and insisted that no such test would ever happen. His denial was firm, emotionally charged, and designed to close the door on further scrutiny. Yet Kimmel's response did not falter. He did not shout, argue, or attempt to provoke. Instead, he calmly reminded the audience that the refusal itself left questions unanswered. By highlighting the contrast between an outright challenge and a refusal to participate, Kimmel reinforced the central theme of accountability, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. The exchange between Kimmel and Trump at this point was about more than just the documents, the witness, or even the birth certificates. It had become a test of credibility, a demonstration of how evidence and reason could challenge even the most powerful denials. Kimmel had carefully structured the segment so that each claim and counterclaim was followed by clear reasoning and factual checks. Every statement had been laid out, every discrepancy examined, and now the challenge of a DNA test brought the conversation to a tangible, concrete level. The audience's attention was unwavering. The story that had started with an insult had developed into a layered narrative involving documents, testimony, and conflicting claims. Each revelation had added tension, and now the ultimate call to action, the DNA test, transformed abstract questions into a real, measurable solution. It was a masterstroke of strategy and clarity, showing the power of combining evidence, logic, and courage in the face of denial. Kimmel's approach throughout the night had been careful yet firm. He had not attacked personally. He had not speculated wildly. Instead, he had relied on documentation, testimony, and reasoned argument to guide the audience through a complicated scenario. That approach culminated in the final challenge, a statement that was both direct and unambiguous. In one sentence, he forced the issue from speculation into the realm of action, demanding clarity in a situation filled with uncertainty. Trump's refusal left the segment with a lingering tension that extended beyond the studio. Kimmel closed the broadcast with a reminder to the audience that truth and evidence mattered more than insults or theatrics. He emphasized that accountability is not about winning arguments, but about confronting questions honestly and being willing to provide proof when claims are challenged. It was a lesson that went beyond the specifics of the case, speaking to larger ideas about responsibility, credibility, and the pursuit of answers in complex situations. By the end of the night, Kimmel had transformed what could have been an embarrassing confrontation into a story that was both thought-provoking and memorable. He had presented evidence, given a voice to a mysterious witness, highlighted inconsistencies, and challenged the highest authority in the country to provide proof. He had turned tension into curiosity and skepticism into active questioning. For the audience, it was a demonstration of how careful reasoning, calm presentation, and a willingness to confront claims directly can create moments that are both compelling and meaningful. As the show ended, one thing was clear. The story was far from over. The documents, the witness, and the challenge left lingering questions that would continue to spark discussion and reflection. Kimmel's careful handling had ensured that viewers were not just entertained, but engaged, thinking critically about evidence, claims, and the importance of accountability. The final challenge, in particular, left a mark. It was a reminder that truth can always be tested, and that the pursuit of clarity is a responsibility that belongs to everyone, no matter how powerful or influential they might be. That night, Jimmy Kimmel had proven that wit alone is not enough in the face of serious claims. Strategy, composure, and an unwavering focus on evidence can turn a conflict into a lesson about credibility and accountability. And even though the ultimate answers remained unanswered, the challenge he issued was clear, direct, and unforgettable. It was a finale that reminded everyone watching that truth matters, that evidence counts, and that the courage to ask the right questions is just as important as any.